Okay, we have one more panel before our final keynote address. I invite the panel up. Navigating cloud. Well, this is going to be a great panel. Listen to these folks because they're going to tell you about all about cloud migration.
I'm the picture that's not on the screen. I'm taking the role of moderating this panel. Thanks, guys, for answering my call when I reached out recently. I was going to ask you a question. You don't have to introduce yourselves. You can talk about yourselves later over drinks. But if you were to have someone for dinner at your place, you could invite anyone. They could be living or dead. Someone famous, someone Canadian. Rohit, I'll start with you. I didn't prep this either, so.
Hello. All right. Yeah, thanks for teeing us up with that because that'd be hard to come up with on the spot. And since I'm going first and we're in a data information sort of a conference, I pick Alexander Graham Bell, the OG of information sharing.
That's interesting. I pick Ryan Reynolds from a marketing perspective, and he's really driven his whole business around data. So I'd really want to get in his head to see where he's going with AI and data.
Hold on, Craig, who?
Ryan Reynolds.
Does everyone know Brian Reynolds?
Ryan.
Oh, Ryan.
Ryan Reynolds.
The actor.
The actor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the guy who builds the marketing campaigns, the aviation whiskey or aviation gin. There we go.
I got it. Okay. That's my hearing.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah. If my kids know that I have this opportunity, then I'll have to choose Drake. But if I have to choose myself, I don't know how many of you are familiar. I would choose Brian Kernighan. So we talk about a lot of advancement, but I think I genuinely believe all these advancement can be traced back to Unix and C. And he was a Canadian who was instrumental in the development and enablement of Unix and C as a language. So if I have the opportunity, I'll go with Brian.
Anybody in the room? We'll discuss it. We'll discuss it afterwards. One other. So just as we were coming up here, I was wondering. I remember it was RBC, probably 2004, 2005, 2006 when the talks started around the cloud. And this idea of moving data into the cloud, and it was so foreign, and we were just like, what is that? What is that going to look like? What does that mean? So, does anyone remember the date was 2006. So who was the first to bring elastic compute to the marketplace? Craig.
AWS.
Yes, he's right. How quickly, Rohit, who is next?
Rackspace.
No, I only focused on the big three. So I'll help you. It was Google. So 2 years later, so AWS came out in 2006. 2 years later, Google launched the Google App Engine, platform as a service. And then 2 years after that, Microsoft, came out, fast follower, 2 years later with Azure. So 18 years ago, the cloud is where we started hosting data. And then I looked and it was approximated that as of 2023, estimated that there are 100 zettabytes of data globally that are being created. And I just had no concept of how much data a zettabyte would equate, what would that equate to, like in a consumer context. So I looked that one up. Looking at your phone, if an average phone is 128 gigs, we're looking at 781 billion smartphones. So the amount of data that is now available in 2023 estimated would be the equivalent of what 781 billion phones. And how many phones per person would that be? All right, like, is that about 100 phones per person? Aren't there 7 or 8 billion people in the world? Yeah, just phenomenal amounts. So with that backdrop, we've got Yasir from our host venue from Deloitte. You are in a great position where you get to work across many organizations. wanted to just start off by asking you, in the Canadian context here, as it relates to cloud adoption, what are some of the key themes that you and the folks at Deloitte are observing in terms of adoption, but also some of the friction points that are maybe inhibiting organizations from moving as quickly as the cloud providers would like us to move?
Yeah. Well, I think there are no surprise that the market is continuously spending on cloud. So I think within the last year, it's still double-digit growth on even public cloud spending. So that thing, I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon. Some of the traditional drivers, which we continue to see even last year, were like the agility of the cloud. Everybody knows that it makes you more efficient. You don't have to wait for those hardware and servers to pop into your data centers. So that aspect has been there, and it's still there. We also see that a lot of companies want to reduce the TCO, and cloud helps in that. And that also we continue to see. I think one thing which happened within the last year or so is the Gen AI aspect of cloud. So a lot of innovation which is happening in the AI space is happening on cloud. And that's an interesting thing in terms of cloud adoption, because this is business-led now. So all the Gen AI use cases and all those are very business-led adoption of cloud. So when I was reading on Gartner the other day that from 2025 to 2028, the shift of cloud would be that from a technical disruptor, it would become a business necessity. And within the Gen AI space, I can see that happening, that it becomes a business necessity going forward in the coming years or so. In terms of the challenges, or I would say the not roadblocks, but why some companies are not able to deploy, I would put like three key categories. The first one is the migration cost. And that's where like the big companies or the companies which have been there from the last 2 decades or so, they have invested hugely on the on-prem systems. Like there are millions of lines of code which exist in the big banks or all the retail old companies, right? And it's non-trivial to migrate all of that to cloud. There is a cost associated with it, but there's also a risk associated with all that migration. And we have seen quite a few which have gone south, right? So I would say that is one of the aspects, the migration cost. And that's where we see that a lot of these Fortune 100 companies, I'm talking about the data side, they've started cloud for new use cases, but their core analytic systems are at times still on-prem using legacy technologies. And that's, I think, one of the key. The other is the skills aspect. So while we hear a lot of cloud, not everybody really knows cloud, right? So, and there are organizations like JP Morgan with 50,000 people in IT. Again, it's not easy to make them all skilled in cloud solutions. So skills and training and change management aspect, I think that's another thing which is delaying the journey. And the last but not the least is the security aspect. And it's not that the cloud is not secure, right? I think cloud has come a long way. It has all the fundamental security technologies. It's the governance and policy aspect. A lot of these organizations have security policies which were written for on-prem systems, architectures which were more adapted to the on-prem systems. So changing all that, having all this governance and security policies for cloud, again, it's non-trivial, and that takes time. So I would say these three are the key things which we see as a roadblock for the delay in cloud adoption. The intent is there, but it's going to happen as we proceed.
The Rohit, from where you're situated. So Rohit I'm going to ask you Naryant, the company name. Maybe I'm intrigued, right? So this is Naryant is a company that you started. There's some reason behind the name of your firm.
I'll do that part quickly. You can check it out. It's human and machine intelligence working together. But if I could just pick up on Yasir's point, on the cloud migration, then this was a good discussion we were having. We represent sort of the smaller data folks, right? The implementers, if you will, of a lot of the big tech that's out there. And so what we've seen in terms of cloud migration is that a lot. So we deal a lot in healthcare and in supply chain logistics. So if you rewind the clock 10 years ago, there were some organizations, clinics and things like that got out of the gates and they got, innovative systems going. They started collecting data in a structured way. They migrated from Access to SQL and things like that, right? And they have actually had an easier time migrating up that maturity curve, and they were able to get onto the cloud quicker. What we've seen since about 2015 onwards is data governance is starting to get established as a more robust department, and that's actually been adding a lot of the things that Yasir just mentioned. And what that's done is that it's prohibiting that adoption across the organization. So that's why I think we're hearing a lot of, hey, this is stifling innovation. And I think that there's some truth to that. That, some parts of the organization were able to get out of the gates, they're on the cloud, and somehow they're, operating outside the grid of the overall governance structure. So where we've seen, even in the last couple of years, the cloud adoption being a bit faster is if, using a federated model, like this is the overall governance framework, the line of business can choose whether to, keep things in-house versus let other operators set up, their architecture sort of outside of the overall network. I just wanted to add that point.
Craig, M&T Bank is a relatively new employer for you, according to LinkedIn, right? I got to know you a few years ago when you were with Microsoft. M&T Bank is, have you guys seen M&T around here? I don't think so.
You can't miss it. If you go across the Peace Bridge, it's the largest tower in Buffalo. It's the beacon in the fog. So I joined M&T basically to transform the organization. We're at a tremendous opportunity as that we just crossed $200 billion in terms of that threshold that has significant regulatory oversight and improvement that we need to make. And that'll set the foundation for us to kind of grow into that larger top 10 bank that we're looking for within the US. Currently, we're kind of between, Maine and Virginia. We're out in New York and Pennsylvania as well, with some footprint in the UK. 22,000 employees. So we're not insignificant with about 1,000 branches. It gives me the same kind of worked extensively in the US with BMO Harrison and TD Bank North. It's got that similar. We're going to be a large bank. We're going to do it right, and we're going to really be significant in the U.S. banking system in the next 5 years.
Very good. It's nice. And do you get to work from home in Toronto, or do you have to go to Buffalo?
I commute. Depends what's going on, right? Yeah. Wherever you need me, I'll be.
Oh, there you go. So now, we heard definitely, Yasir, from some of the challenges, the cost, and the complexity of moving to the cloud. Craig, you're in a new role, a new mandate. Curious, if there are success metrics that are at that top of house, C-level, board level. They look at the dollar signs associated with investing or partnering with any of the cloud service providers. I think it was 3-4 weeks ago at the Google event down in Vegas. Coming out of that, we heard about big announcement with TD Bank and one of the other banks, Scotia, I believe it was. Big investments that are being made. So just curious, like when you're at the top of the house, when it's at a senior management level, the board, and they're considering, the investments, how do they look at this other than the sizable investment to quantify what does success look like? 1 year, 2 year, 3 years down the road?
Yeah, I think it's about maturity. Today, it's really an infrastructure problem that we're kind of looking at rather than a business enablement, business transformation effort. So we have the CIOs who, 1,500 applications. We're going through a migration of whether it's colo or cloud, and we have, our basically traffic lights around that. Where we need to get to is that business outcome driven, right? What business value it's going to drive, not only for our Azure implementation, but the other SaaS providers that we leverage today. It's really about how do we enable time to market. At the same time, how do we start to look at the larger picture around data? Lots of data risk, I think, is inherent now, much more than it was 5 years ago or even 10 years ago. Greater regulatory oversight, and the cost of a data breach is front and center. So while it's infrastructure today, we do have some change agents have recently joined and looking to begin to adopt more of a business-centric view and outcome for our cloud journey.
Good stuff. Rohit, your consultancy and your clients are outside of bank. I would say largely outside of or completely outside of banking, which is refreshing. So I was just curious, like in the context of some of the more, to the extent you can speak about some of the more public successes that you've supported within, let's start with within healthcare, public sector, healthcare here in Canada. Anything you could?
Yeah, absolutely. And
about?
there are a lot of successes, right? I think that we're all consumers of data, and healthcare is becoming more and more prevalent. The patients, the clients, if you will, are demanding that they have more ready access to their patient records. Mental health piece has been pretty big in terms of just getting access to the disparate amount of resources. So we actually do a very good job, despite the popular, belief out there. We do have a ton of resources that are available right here in the GTA, right across Ontario, and we're at a point now where we're actually delivering services outside of the province, right, using this digital infrastructure, to our neighbors in Saskatchewan. Right, or Nova Scotia, where they just don't have the infrastructure, not just the digital infrastructure, but the overall mental health care delivery. So it's really innovative stuff. It's really cool stuff. The because you brought up the financial services piece, what we find fascinating about this community is that we think that the FI community is about 20 years ahead, where basically everybody else is at. You've seen and have gone through some pretty interesting challenges in the last 20 years. And I just think that the healthcare sector or the supply chain logistics sector can learn from that and not repeat the same mistakes. And if you look at the governance around all of it, that's what the posture is of the governance, that, hey, you cannot abuse consumer data. You cannot abuse patient data. So even if you're a cool startup, you can't get away with the things that, let's say, advertising was able to get away with back in the early 2000s. So I think that those are some of the critical forces that are going to be there as we innovate through, in healthcare. So no dig on the FI community. I think that we're learning a lot from them.
No, I think, I just often, when we think of the concept of data for good, right? And I think each of us as citizens, Canada or wherever you're living, right? I mean, data access, we all, we're collecting data about ourselves constantly on our phones and watches, et cetera, right? So, I mean, I think it's very near and dear to us. So the work that I'm familiar, I've gotten to know you over the last couple of years. So seeing what you're doing in industries outside of banking, and then of course, in choosing to become part of the council, we certainly appreciate the opportunity to work there. And in Canada here, we've seen a focus. I don't know, the logos went through pretty quick, but Health Canada has come aboard as a member. Environment Climate Change Canada has come aboard, working with the Public Health Agency of Canada. So I think within the council, there's so much for me, it was refreshing. I enjoyed 20 plus years at the banks, and then now the opportunity to engage with leaders within the public sector that are trying to do things, digitize, right? Bring down the costs of services, provide better services, right? So there's definitely, back to this council and the community, there's opportunities, right, to share sort of the best practices from financial services across other industries. John, you're looking at me. We got 4 minutes left.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Matt Fowler, do you have a question?
Well, I have a question for Pat. I have, oh, okay. You go first.
Thank you so much. I was curious in terms of the cloud, like we saw in the Snowflake over the last few weeks. It's not necessarily the cloud infrastructure, but how it's actually used. The organizations, if they don't put in multi-factor authentication, they don't have network policy, it's not going to work. Do you feel organizations are ready? And do you see a difference between US and Canada? I was sharing with John, I work with a lot of, some work in US and in Canada, and I see a stark difference. And I'm curious from the panel, if you see that difference as well.
Yeah, I can take the first shot at that. So you're absolutely right. And that's what I said initially, that the whole Snowflake incident, it's not about that the technology was not there. The technology was there. The MFA has been there for a while, right? But if you're not using it, so the security governance aspect, I think that's the thing which organizations, some of the, I would say the financial institutions in Canada, they are aware that they have to update all their governance and security policies because it's a different world in cloud, right? So the democratization of data is much more than it was in the on-prem world. In terms of your US and Canada comparison, it really varies from industry to industry, but I don't think there is a big difference there because at least in the financial side, even in the big banks in US, a lot of them still have their core analytic systems are still in the on-prem world. They have all the technologies, Snowflake, Databricks, all the cloud, but the core analytics is still being done on-prem, right? And they are cautious about this whole governance aspect of security. So I don't see a big difference, but maybe somebody else. Craig is in US and he can comment on that.
I think the regulatory and the court system in the U.S. is much more onerous. I think if you get a data breach, you're almost out of business in terms of the financial impact. But that said, I think the customers can do better in terms of improving their security. I think the vendors can do better as well. I think there needs to be, AWS, Microsoft, others talk about shared responsibility, where they work with the customer to kind of ensure there's a whole holistic security. Blaming the customer for security lacks, even, I think it's on the vendor to kind of help guide so you have an optimal security platform for your data, because it works both ways, right? So if I have a data breach, I'm going to bring my data out and you're going to lose business, rather than you want more of my data because I know it's an insecure environment to support my business in.
I'll see my question. And I don't mean to put the panel on the spot, but
Not the moderator.
not the moderator. Have you been involved in, or have you worked with the CDMC model?
Yeah, back 21. So
When it was being developed.
when it was being developed, we put how much IP into that in terms of human capital?
Well, the
Right.
reason why I bring that up is the title of this set is in the risky digital terrain. And one of the things that CDMC focused on was understanding the risks of data in cloud. Now we have legislation in Europe, the DORA legislation and the operational resiliency. Do you see that in working with your clients, working within your companies? There's a risk of cloud outages, and they aren't impossible. We've seen some, right? So how are you addressing them?
So just on the CDMC, I think we need to do better in terms of advertising and promoting it. I came across so many firms that saying, we need to build a cloud capability model to secure our data in the cloud. So let's kind of promote that out in terms of what the good work we've done here.
Excited you.
Well, you'll make
So
you'll.
we gotta sell.
Doing your job.
Yeah, we gotta sell. Yeah, that model, if you work through it, the assessment of that, it starts to build out the framework for success, right? It answers all the questions that you need to ensure security, data risk is minimized, and you can operate at scale in the cloud. So yeah, in terms of outages, you really need to think that through. It's not as simple as before where we have two data centers, one goes down, we just flip to the next. If you have a very complex cloud environment with SaaS environments and multi-cloud, it's very much a mathematical problem now you need to solve.
And I learned in one of my last trips here, data residency in cloud, of course, has to be transparent. You have to know where the cloud provider is storing your data. And there's actually concern, Canadian enterprises here are concerned if data is stored in the US because of, as you mentioned, some of the onerous laws, right? So even between friendly countries, there's concern about where data resides and what kind of laws are opposed. So you have to have that transparency.
Yeah, and if I could just add, I think the CDMC is great. I think some of the discussions that we've been having that's pretty fruitful is how do we productize it, right? It's great as a framework and for training folks. I think that's great. So consultants and product development companies should be using it. We've certainly benefited from that because it's a well understood and, like you said, a lot of wisdom went into that. But I think that the other part of it is that the demand is just growing exponentially, where that needs to almost be baked in at delivery, right? So how do we get the unit economics of that to work at the product level, right? So that they're adopting it without knowing they're adopting it. But then we also have a second ramp that allows folks within those organizations to get trained. Because I mean, if you look at just anybody working in healthcare, they don't need another training program right now. Right? They rely on us as a data practitioners to come with that security first mindset and the delivery model. So
cell phones you mentioned,
781.
all that data and the data that 1 terabyte of data
absolutely,
per car, right?
absolutely. There's all the key points. I'll give one quick use case if that's okay. There's been a proliferation of patient portals, right? For any sort of specialized, if you're talking to specialists, they're going to have a portal where you can log your data. Patient reported data is like a big thing. Well, guess what? That's one of the biggest vectors for breach.
Yeah.
Right? And so we knew that just even going into it, and we asked the hospitals to get their information security team on to start building that framework while we were doing the clinical workflows. So I think that there's responsibility, as you just mentioned, that the vendors need to do that, and we had to work with the partners to do that. Yeah, the whole day it makes sense.
So let me ask everybody again, thank our panel.